The evening was aglow with the shimmer of twinkling lights and elegant decor, setting the stage for the annual company gala. It was an event marked by success and celebration, attended by the who's who of the corporate world. Among the well-dressed attendees were Jane and her husband, Alex, who mingled through the crowd with practiced smiles and polite nods. On the surface, they appeared to be the perfect couple, complementing each other's presence as they engaged with colleagues and friends. However, beneath the surface, their marriage told a different story, a narrative threaded with silent battles and unspoken words, a relationship that had settled into the comfort of routine and familiarity, devoid of the spark that once ignited their passion. While Alex was engrossed in conversations, Jane's smile faltered when she turned away, her eyes searching the crowd for something, or perhaps someone, who could awaken the joy she used to feel. It was then that she noticed Greg, Alex's boss, commanding the attention of those around him with his charismatic presence and engaging stories. Greg, with his impeccable suit and confident demeanour, had a gravity to him that drew people in, including Jane. As their eyes met across the room, a jolt of excitement surged through her, a feeling so stark against the backdrop of her fading contentment with Alex. As the evening progressed, Jane found herself drawn to Greg, weaving through the clusters of chatting guests to find herself closer to him. Greg noticed her approach and welcomed her with a warm, inviting smile that sent a wave of thrill through her. They struck up a conversation, effortless and filled with laughter. Greg listened intently, his eyes locked on hers, making her feel seen and heard in ways that had become rare in her interactions with Alex. Their conversation flowed seamlessly from casual work talk to more personal anecdotes. With each word, Jane felt herself being pulled deeper into the gravitational pull of Greg's charm. He complimented her on her insights and laughed at her jokes with a genuineness that felt intoxicating. The more they talked, the more Jane felt a connection that was hard to ignore. It was as if they were the only two people in the room, their spouses and the gala itself fading into the background. Amid the laughter and subtle flirtations, a dangerous game began. Each exchange of witty banter, each shared smile, fanned the flames of attraction that threatened to cross lines Jane had never intended to approach. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once, the danger of the situation only adding to the allure. Jane found herself reveling in the attention Greg gave her, basking in the glow of admiration that she hadn't realized she so desperately missed. As the night drew to a close, Greg leaned in, his voice dropping to a husky whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "I really enjoyed talking to you tonight, Jane. Let's do this again, just the two of us," he suggested, his eyes sparkling with an invitation that was both exciting and illicit. Jane's heart raced with the implications of his words. She knew she should decline, that this could lead nowhere but down a path filled with complications and regret. Yet, as she met his gaze, feeling the magnetic pull of his charm, she found herself nodding in agreement, swept up in the moment and the promise of something that filled her with an adrenaline rush she hadn't felt in years. As she and Alex drove home later that night, Jane was quiet, lost in thought. The evening had started as a simple company event, but it had sparked something within her, a desire, a curiosity, perhaps even a lifeline to the woman she used to be, vibrant and alive. She knew the dangers of the path she was contemplating, yet part of her yearned to feel that spark again, to feel desired and vibrant. It was a temptation that whispered to her in the quiet moments, a siren call that she found increasingly difficult to resist. The quiet corners of the city became their sanctuaries, spaces where Jane and Greg could explore the connection that had sparked unexpectedly, but burned with an intensity that neither could deny. Each meeting was a step deeper into a world of complexity and emotion that Jane had never anticipated when she first found herself drawn to Greg's charm. Coffee shops with dim corners, long drives with no destination, afternoons stolen in art galleries. These became the backdrop for their growing relationship, each rendezvous wrapping them tighter into a tapestry of secrecy and passion. As these secret meetings evolved, they filled with laughter, deep conversations, and moments of shared vulnerability. Greg had a way of listening to Jane that made her feel like she was the only person in the world, his focused attention making her feel understood and appreciated in ways she had long forgotten. But with each stolen moment, each lingering goodbye, a pang of guilt would tighten around Jane's heart. She would return home to Alex, her husband, carrying the weight of her betrayal alongside the grocery bags and dry cleaning. At home, Jane played the role of a loving wife, cooking dinners and sharing how her day went, all while the memory of Greg's touch lingered on her skin. She listened to Alex talk about work, about projects and deadlines, sometimes even about Greg himself. And it took all her strength to nod and smile, to keep her voice steady. The duality of her life was exhausting. By day she was Alex's partner, attentive and present. By night, in her thoughts, she replayed the moments with Greg, each replay a mix of pleasure and pain. The thrill of the affair was intoxicating. It made Jane feel alive, vibrant and desirable. But it was also isolating. She couldn't confide in her friends for fear of judgment or worse, the truth slipping out and shattering the fragile peace of her marriage. Her life became a careful dance of managing calendars, of deleting messages, of fabricating half-truths to cover up where she had been. The strain of maintaining this facade was relentless, and with each passing day, Jane felt a growing weariness with her double life. Internally, Jane's conflict grew. She loved Greg, or at least she loved the way he made her feel, cherished, exciting and free. But she also loved Alex, the history they shared, the life they had built. She remembered their early days, filled with promise and love, and how over the years those feelings had settled into a comfortable routine that now felt more like complacency. She wondered when she had started to feel more like Alex's roommate than his partner. Was it gradual, or had there been a moment when something between them irrevocably changed? Each secret encounter with Greg was a reminder of what was missing at home, but also a betrayal of the vows she had made. The more she saw Greg, the more Jane felt herself drifting from Alex, her husband becoming more like a shadow in the home they shared, a figure of stability and familiarity, but no longer one of passion. The gap between them widened, filled with unspoken truths and unnoticed absences, and Jane felt trapped between her desires and her responsibilities. One evening, as Jane sat across from Alex at dinner, watching him talk about a new project at work, she realized how far she had drifted. There was a time when his stories would captivate her, when she would engage eagerly with suggestions and questions. Now she found herself nodding along mechanically, her mind wandering to the last afternoon she spent with Greg. The contrast between her reactions, her disinterest here and her engagement with Greg, was stark and painful. It highlighted the emotional distance that had grown not just between her and Alex, but within herself. As she lay in bed that night, Alex's steady breathing beside her, Jane felt the loneliness envelop her. She was living two lives, and each was a half-life, fulfilling in moments but overwhelmingly incomplete. The guilt, the excitement, the passion, and the pain swirled within her, a storm of emotions she no longer felt she had control over. The realization hit her with clarity amidst the turmoil. Something had to change. This duality could not sustain itself. Something would have to give. The air at home began to shift, thick with a tension that Alex could not fully understand but felt deeply. It was in the pauses between conversations, in the longer-than-usual silences that stretched uncomfortably between them at dinner. Jane seemed distracted, often lost in thought, her laughter not quite reaching her eyes as it used to. Alex noticed how her phone had become a constant companion, how she angled the screen slightly away from him when texting. It was these small, almost imperceptible changes that seeded doubts in his mind. One evening, as they were cleaning up after a quiet dinner, Alex decided to voice his growing concerns. "Is everything okay? You've seemed off lately," he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral, not wanting to sound accusatory. Jane's response was too quick, too rehearsed. "I'm just tired from work, that's all," she said with a forced smile that didn't quite mask the flicker of panic in her eyes. Alex wanted to believe her, to push away the nagging suspicion that something deeper was amiss, but the uneasy feeling lingered, a persistent whisper in the back of his mind. The close calls began to accumulate, each one a jarring reminder of the growing gap between them. One day, Alex came home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Jane with plans for an impromptu evening out. As he walked through the door, he was met, not with delight, but a rush of evident panic, as Jane hurriedly closed her laptop, her cheeks flushed with more than just surprise. "You're home early," she stammered, her voice a mix of confusion and alarm. The moment hung between them, heavy and awkward. Alex tried to brush off his discomfort, attributing it to his own imagination, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Another day, while Jane was in the shower, her phone buzzed continuously on the kitchen counter. Driven by a mix of curiosity and mounting suspicion, Alex glanced at the screen only to see multiple messages from a number not saved in her contacts. The preview of the texts was enough to send a cold wave of realization down his spine. The words were too intimate, too familiar, and not meant for a wife from someone who was just a friend. The pieces began to fall into place, each text a puzzle piece revealing a picture Alex was not prepared to see. Confronting Jane about the messages was inevitable. The evening air was cool as they sat across from each other, the emotional distance far greater than the physical one. "Who is texting you like that?" Alex asked, his voice a blend of hurt and anger. Jane's explanation was fumbling, unsatisfactory. She mentioned a new friend from work, brushing off the intimacy of the messages as mere friendliness. But the trust had been fractured, the doubts too significant to dismiss with weak explanations. The tension in the house grew palpable, the foundation of their relationship, shaken by secrecy and suspicion. Meals were eaten with minimal conversation, and nights were spent turned away from each other, the space in their bed feeling wider than ever. Alex watched as Jane retreated further into herself, her moments of absence, both physical and emotional, becoming more frequent. The woman he loved seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a stranger with secrets. As suspicion turned into a silent guardian of their interactions, Alex found himself constantly on edge, interpreting every phone call, every late night at work, through the lens of betrayal. The weight of not knowing, of suspecting but not having concrete proof, began to take its toll on him. It was a limbo of pain and uncertainty where every day brought more questions than answers. This limbo, however, could not last forever. It demanded resolution, a confrontation of the reality that lay hidden beneath excuses and half-truths. The strain of the unspoken, of the life half-lived in shadows, was unsustainable. For both Jane and Alex, the moment of truth was approaching, a necessary end to the cycle of doubt and denial that had taken over their lives. The morning was unusually crisp as Alex drove to Greg's house, a plan forming in his mind. He needed to speak to Greg about an urgent project, or so he would say. His grip tightened on the steering wheel as the familiar neighbourhood came into view, the manicured lawns and sprawling homes, a stark reminder of the world they inhabited, where appearances were meticulously maintained, just as Jane had been maintaining hers. Pulling into the driveway, Alex's heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. He rang the doorbell, each chime echoing his racing thoughts. When Greg opened the door, surprise etched on his face, Alex didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped inside, his eyes immediately drawn to the coat rack by the entrance. There, hanging alongside Greg's coats, was a scarf he recognized instantly as Jane's. "Greg, we need to talk," Alex began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. But before Greg could respond, a noise from the upstairs caught Alex's attention. It was faint, the sound of footsteps, hesitant yet hurried. Alex's gaze met Greg's, the unspoken realization passing between them before Greg could conceal it. Without another word, Alex turned and headed up the stairs, his heart sinking with each step. At the top of the stairs, the door to the guest room was ajar. Pushing it open, Alex's worst fears materialized before his eyes. There was Jane, her expression one of shock and fear, caught in the act of gathering her things, her hurried movements pausing as she saw Alex. The room fell silent, the air thick with betrayal and heartbreak. "Alex, Jane's voice broke the silence, trembling and uncertain. Alex's expression hardened. He didn't want excuses. He wanted the truth. "How long, Jane?" His question was simple, direct, yet loaded with the agony of betrayal. Jane's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her as she realized the futility of denial. "A few months," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The confession hung heavy in the room, each word a weight added to the burden already pressing on Alex's shoulders. "Why?" It was the only question that mattered now, a single word that carried all the confusion, the pain, the betrayal that Alex felt. Jane looked at him, her eyes welling with tears, a mix of regret and relief at no longer having to carry the secret alone. "I felt alone, Alex," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We lost something somewhere along the way. I was lonely, and he was there. It was wrong, and I'm so sorry." Her apology was heartfelt, her words sincere, but they did little to ease the sting of her actions. Greg, who had followed Alex upstairs, stood silently by the doorway, the complexity of his own emotions evident on his face. He had no words that could mend the situation, his role in the betrayal marking him as much a part of the problem as Jane. The confrontation that followed was charged with emotion. Accusations were made, regrets voiced, and the painful details of the affair laid bare. Jane spoke of her loneliness, of feeling overlooked and unimportant. Alex listened, his face a mask of stoic hurt, his occasional nods the only sign that he heard her words. As the reality of the situation settled, the initial shock gave way to a deep, pervasive sadness. Jane and Alex stood amidst the wreckage of their marriage, the future uncertain, their past a tapestry of both beautiful and painful memories now tainted by betrayal. The decision of what came next loomed large, a daunting path whether they chose to part ways or to begin the difficult process of forgiveness and healing. The drive back home was silent, each lost in their thoughts, the gap between them wider than ever. The trust that had once bound them together had been shattered, and both knew it would take more than apologies to rebuild it. The road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, but the first painful step had been taken. In the days following the confrontation, the atmosphere at home became a reflection of the turmoil within both Jane and Alex. Meals were silent affairs, with both of them lost in their own thoughts, the clinking of cutlery against plates often the only sound breaking the tension. Each morning they awoke as strangers in the same bed, the space between them filled with the unsaid, with the heavy weight of betrayal and disappointment that lingered like a thick fog. Alex, once quick to anger or to forgive, found himself caught in a maelstrom of indecision. The hurt ran deep, its roots entangled in the love and trust he had once felt so strongly. Each day he looked at Jane, searching for the woman he had married, wondering if, beneath the mistakes and regrets, there was still a foundation strong enough to rebuild upon. The love hadn't disappeared overnight, but it had been scarred, and those scars itched with questions of what and why and how. Jane, for her part, felt the guilt of her actions deeply. It coloured her every moment, from the way she could hardly meet Alex's eyes in the morning to how she recoiled from his touch, not out of dislike, but out of a profound sense of unworthiness. She had broken something precious, and the realization came with an acute understanding of the pain she had inflicted not just on Alex, but on herself as well. The house they had made a home now felt like a quiet battleground, each room echoing with memories of a happier past. Jane found herself walking through them, touching the back of the sofa where Alex had once kissed her so passionately, looking at the dining table where they had shared so many lively meals with friends, each memory a sharp jab reminding her of what could potentially be lost forever. As the initial shock faded into a dull, persistent ache, Jane knew a decision lay before them. The path of forgiveness seemed steep and fraught with potential pitfalls. Could Alex ever trust her again? Could she trust herself not to stray when the next rough patch hit? Alternatively, the path of separation loomed as a stark, painful relinquishment of all they had built together. But perhaps it was the more honest path, a necessary severing for both to find happiness anew. One evening, sitting across from each other in the living room, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor, they faced these choices. Jane broke the silence, her voice steady but soft. "I would understand if you can't forgive me, Alex. I can't undo what I've done, but I am so sorry for the hurt I've caused you, for breaking our vows. I love you, and part of loving you is wanting your happiness, even if it's not with me." Alex listened, the lines in his face softening slightly. "I don't know if I can get past this, Jane. I'm hurt, yes, but I'm also confused. I miss us, the real us. I don't know if we can find that again, or if it's too late." His voice cracked with the strain of his emotions, the indecision clear in his eyes. They talked long into the night, not arguing, not blaming any more, but exploring their pain, their hopes, and the remnants of their love. It was a conversation that stretched into the early hours of the morning, until the first hints of dawn began to light the sky. In the end, they chose to try, to give their marriage one last chance, knowing the effort required would be immense. Counselling sessions were arranged, and slowly they began the painstaking process of rebuilding. It was not the sweeping romantic gestures that marked their days, but small significant acts of kindness and understanding. A note left on the fridge, a gentle squeeze of the hand, a shared joke that for a moment brought back the echo of their old laughter. Through this journey, Jane learned to forgive herself, and Alex learned to trust again, each day a step towards healing. They rediscovered their friendship, the deep underlying connection that had first drawn them together. It was not easy, and there were days when the shadow of the past loomed too large, but they faced each challenge as it came, committed to emerging stronger. This period of their lives, marked by pain and healing, taught them about the fragility of love and the strength of forgiveness. Whether their marriage would survive the long term remained uncertain, but they had found a new appreciation for each other, a new way to love that was more mature, more understanding, and perhaps, ultimately, more enduring.